We're live.
Hey, everybody, it's Simone and Bella, and we are here for another soul conversation. Today, we're going to be talking to the archetype of the 35. So, let's see what that 35 has to say. I would like to communicate with the soul of the 35, the archetype of the soul of the 35. This is healing. So, the 35, they're skating. I feel like I saw the skates and I feel like almost like a speed skater on ice, but it's like roller skating. And there's a rhythm to the moving forward. And as the skater is moving forward in that rhythm, it's like he's constantly scanning the where he's going and exploring everything that is going on as he skates, as they skate. And my attention is brought to the heart. So imagine, one of these speed skaters that's crouched over and their arms kind of flow with them. It's very embodied. It's, I'm aware of the skater's whole body. And it feels in my body like the heart is um, the the driving force of where the skater is going, is moving forward. And once we got the whole, it's this embodied, heart centered moving forward, the whole scene shifted and it almost became like a swirl, a tornado like shape. And there were flowers everywhere. And it feels like embodiment in everything. If we generated all, if the flowers are life force, my next vision is that it's like that life force is seated everywhere, seated, seeded, seated everywhere and in everything. So I went from being aware of this heartfelt, embodied moving forward to the awareness of life force, to the awareness of life force seated in all energy. And it's like I'm not just watching the skater. I'm not just the skater. I'm everywhere. It's everything. I'm aware of the life force in everything, and I am the life force in everything. And the way it looks on my screen is like imagine little flowers embedded in everything. So like the heart of everything. And the 35 is saying that I want you to know that you are everywhere. And you are everything. It's really the awareness. So it's almost like he's saying that the difference between the gift of adventure and the city of boundlessness is simply awareness, that they exist all at once, but it's the awareness of that. And he says when you can see your heart in the water, in the trees, in um, the flowers, the ocean, in other people, you will experience the boundlessness. And it's as if once you have the experience of boundlessness, that you don't need the journey of the skater because you're already there. And so what he shows me is like a lotus flower with someone sitting in the middle of it. That life is becomes the meditation of awareness. And I started to say, a person sitting in meditation in the lotus, and he was like, no, just sitting in the lotus. That it's, it doesn't require uh, the intention of meditation. Is just sitting in the lotus is the the effect. And he's saying that it's really easier than people think to have the experience of connection with all things. And it starts with an acknowledgement of the beauty of each thing and the awareness that that beauty lies within you. That for some people, it's really easy to look at a magnolia or a petunia or a landscape and say, "Oh, that's so beautiful." Or crystal, a rock, a mountain, anything in nature. And for some, it's really easy to acknowledge the beauty and the thing beheld. It's harder to acknowledge that that beauty is within you. And he says that, a simple practice might be, he says, people will say namaste. You know, he says, but it's the actual embodiment of namaste with other things. It's not just people. So when you can acknowledge that the beauty of the mountain is the beauty in you, the strength in the mountain is the strength within you, the 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 power of the current in the ocean is the power of the current within you. And he says, when you can start to even just say those things, see a beautiful flower and recognize that maybe it's the color that you're drawn to, whatever it is, acknowledge that, oh, that exists in me too. And it's not much of a quantum leap to go from the acknowledgement to the experience, but it's a practice. But he says that once you start acknowledging that the beauty of these parts of earth are actually in you, they're vibrations within you, then you can start to have the experience of you're in them. You're in the mountain, you're in the ocean, you're in the tree, you're in the flower, you're in the shrub, you're in the crystal, you're in the rock, you're in the stone. And the beauty of you is embedded in that. And then boundlessness is really a point of view. It's a perception, it's an awareness, it's an awakening to the mountain in you, the current in you, the sunset in you, the sunrise in you, the star in you, the blooming in you, all of it. And then he just showed me this beautiful image of just opening your heart to everything, to the life force in all that is in Gaia, and having the experience of this. He says this is a radical thought, because if you are willing to try, willing to see the beauty of each of those things in you and you in each of those things. He says it's radical because people won't be able to live. Some people won't be able to live the same way that they've been living, because when you see yourself in each thing in you, you have to, you'll be compelled to treat it with the grace and love and care, the divinity that it is. And he says that it will create radical change in some of your lives because you won't be able to engage in the world in the same way. Throwing something away will have a completely different meaning. Consuming something will have a completely different meaning. It's just, it will change the essence of who you are. And so he says, what I'm asking, I've laid it out in a really attainable, graspable way, but it truly is a radical way of being. And this is what I wish for you is a radical knowing of the place you live, Earth, Gaia. And he says, this is what I wish to share with you today. And Bella, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have several questions. The question that first came is that it's speaking about that current inside of us and even that electricity. And for me, it sounds like it's speaking about the Kundalini energy. And I also know that it's the harmonic gate is the 36th, the gate of turbulence that has a lot of like the emotions around sexuality. So I would actually want to hear from this gate, the gate of hunger, but the archetype of the heroine. What does the soul archetype has to say about sexuality and the way that we relate to that, or the way that we are here to create with it or live through it?
Yeah. So the first image was imagine the DNA strands, but imagine them like water almost, or air and water. And they literally came up into a vessel, a human vessel, right up through the root chakra. And he said that he made me feel in my body the inseparableness of that energy from who you are. He says that you're not, there's no separation between you and sexuality and the union, if you will. He says, but through corruption, it is perceived as separate. That there are, he says we could put many labels on the corruption, but he says it's not distinct from who each of you are. It's a natural aspect of embodiment. And when you can allow yourself to feel that as a natural part of who you are, allow the expression as a holistic strength within you, and allow yourself to go there, you can experience sexuality in an embodied way that is life-giving. And it's what I feel as he's talking. It's like I can't now unimagine what he just said, like it feels like to not be embodied with sexuality as a natural part of human existence would be like stripping the D from the NA. It just doesn't even feel like it could happen now, just having the experience of the energy. And he says it's the relishing of the capacity to have this experience. And when beings are grounded in their essence, they don't want to turn away from the natural embodied desire within them.
So if we ask about sexual appetite, because that's sometimes a keynote or keyword that we associate with this gate in human design. So, and it's also linked to the amino acid tryptophan that has to do with serotonin and those levels. So it has this inherent hunger in a low frequency. But can it speak about a healthy sexual appetite? What does that look like for human beings?
Grace, oneness. It is the feeling of the feeling of grace, the feeling of wholeness, completeness. It evokes within, he's showing me, he's doing this, he's making his hand goes like this. So that makes me feel like they're different, they're currents or waveforms. So some people might be at the high end of the waveform, some people might be on the receding end of the waveform, but within those waveforms of the the body's trajectory,
Mm-hmm.
that each person has a fullness within. And he's saying part of what happens is that people are on different waveforms or trajectories.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they perceive they're bad or wrong because, their partner's ready, they're not ready.
Mm-hmm.
But there's an acknowledgement of the way, the natural rhythms of the vessel you're inhabiting, the body that you're in. And he says that to acknowledge that it's important to acknowledge that people have different waveforms that they are experiencing, and that it's not right or wrong, it's just their waveform, and that when each person acknowledges the other, it's like, you're in a body, I'm in a body, somebody else is in another body. We don't all have the same color hair. We don't all have the same resting heart rate. It's close, but it's not quite the same. And just so we all have different waveforms in our natural rhythms, and acknowledging that, he says that's the most intricate thing that you can do. Acknowledge your own waveform and acknowledge the impulses within you. And sometimes everything's going to come into union. Your partner's waveform is going to match your waveform, and it's going to be beautiful. But
Mm-hmm.
other times, your waveform is maybe not in sync with your partner's, but that doesn't mean that you can't have a sexual experience with yourself. That you can love yourself in that way. Acknowledge the waveform that you are in, and not deny what your experience is. So he says that's another way that people fragment, is that their body's waveform is like, I'm ready. And they might think, oh, I don't have a partner, I don't my partner's not ready, whatever. But they forget that they can love themselves in that way. They can be with those, they can feel the feeling within themselves and be with that within themselves, and respect where their waveform is within themselves.
Mm-hmm. So I feel we have comments too from people in the inner circle, and both. It seems to be part of the contemplation right now. And when you speak about, or when it comes through about oneness and wholesomeness and or completeness, for some of us, those are words that are very far away in a way, like in the daily life struggle, when we just feel like maybe there is hunger with our partner, or maybe we have more desire. What I often feel in I know you have been, I know we have been speaking about this before, but the low libido partner, the high libido partner, that there are, of course, one in the relationship is often going to have more drive. And I'm wondering, what are the steps in a practical sense to go from something that looks like a hunger, a serotonin level that is not satisfied, and sometimes with a 35, it's like it's just hunger. It doesn't even matter with whom, when we look at it in human design sense again. So what are the practical steps that human beings can start to take in order to go further on that frequency band towards oneness and completion?
So he's showing me this with a metaphor of a flower, like a daisy flower. So when you're just the petal, you're hungry for the whole flower. When you're just the center of the flower or the stem, you're hungry for the part that's not there.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that when you're the whole flower, you don't hunger for a petal.
Mm-hmm.
You have them all. You have the stem, you have the leaves, there's a completeness. And so he says you're experiencing hunger when you are a part of yourself, a fragment of yourself. And he says if you want to shift out of hunger, embody all the pieces and parts. So that's a process of integration. So he says, I wish that I could give it to you easier, but this is a process of integration. So it's finding all the fragments, where did you leave your petals, and reintegrating them. And he says it's a process of acknowledging, the pieces and parts that you fragmented.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very recoverable. Because you can acknowledge, oh, I separated here, I fragmented there, it's an acknowledgement, that you are fragmented, and then it's an acknowledgement of where and how, and being with the pieces and parts, and understanding, well, why did I fragment? What did I do there? And holding the space of all of those things, and the motivations, the reasons, the perceptions, the beliefs behind the fragmentation. He says it's really truly about embodiment.
So could we say that he's speaking about the sacred union and reclaiming those parts of ourselves, those polarities in ourselves? Is that what he's actually speaking about?
Yes, that's part of the fragmentation. When we start, fragmenting, we're out, we're moving away from sacred union within ourselves. So by reintegrating the parts and pieces, we move into sacred union within ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And that's when that can, even it looks also like when there is sacred union, even if your waveform is going to be unique and differentiated, and somebody else's who's also in sacred union has a waveform that is differentiated and unique, suddenly those two waveforms can play with each other in a way that they wouldn't have been able to do from a fragmented place where there would have been much more interference.
And he's showing that by he's got me looking at flowers that are pollinating, and not every one pollinates at the same time, even though it's a whole field of flowers.
Mm-hmm.
There's a season that they are all pollinating, but that's how he's showing it to me.
Mm-hmm.
That that each flower within the group is pollinating in its divine timing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an acceptance of that.
Mm-hmm. So I wonder. Yeah, so anyway, I mean, I could speak about this forever and have a million questions. And we have Crystal and Amanda, and I even can't pronounce Deidre's name and Yessa. And yeah, Jessa had a question about, I mean, I think we already did speak about it, because you said it's not just because here, would it come naturally, the move, would it come naturally the more we know ourselves and give ourselves that grace they were talking about in the beginning? So that, yeah, that's the question. What comes up with that question? It feels for me like grace is the result, and actually the work, quote unquote, the human path is the integration and the reclaiming and the finding those fragments and like becoming whole again.
He was using the word allowing, the allowing.
Mm-hmm.
The allowing yourself to, to have the experience of whatever it is instead of fragmenting from it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the allowing of the reintegration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are there any last words?
He says that he finds it interesting that the questions that you asked, and he says it's the human trajectory to explore where the most fragmentation is. And so he's just honoring you for asking the hard question. Because he's acknowledging that a lot of fragmentation in human consciousness is in the area of sexuality. And he says you went to the hardest place it is for people to integrate and not be fragmented. And he's saying that even highly integrated beings have fragmentation, and he says it's hard in your world because of all of the he's giving it to me in a feeling in my body and through pictures, so I'm choosing the words, I'm trying to choose really precisely, but it's like all the hinkiness that humans have about embodiment, what they look like, what they feel like, what, everything. And so he says it's one of the places where there is the most fragmentation in your world. So it was a great, he honors you for asking the hardest question, in a sense.
And I guess that when we humans start to go there and we feel like we're not going to die and there's not shame on us, although maybe in the wrong, in some settings there are, but when we start to ask those questions, we can feel the truth inside of us. And we have a lot of comments today. Like this is a beautiful comment that also just shows that what we're speaking about is relevant.
Beautiful.
I mean, we are waking up to this, and I feel a lot of what's before has been the divine feminine, kind of how it's been pictured in the new age and in the like feather thing. But there is something like you can wear feathers, but you can still, there is something grounded with these conversations where you can be completely calm inside of you and be, I want to ask this because this is important, and there is no shame. It's the opposite. It's making us, it's reclaiming our wholeness. It's reclaiming our way of merging with each other in a way that is nurturing instead of in a way that is leaving us feeling more empty afterwards. And in one way, that's the only thing I care about. So that's why it's easy for me to ask questions.
Well, and he's saying that he's also in his response or his, he's encouraging all of us to ask the hardest questions, because that's where, the most healing in the fractal can occur.
Yeah. And I feel even in relationships, some of those questions are not asked. Like often we focus on what we think our partner wants and how we can give them at least enough of that so that they don't freak out almost. Like there is a lot of focus on what do they expect from me? How much do I have to give to keep a kind of like half dead equilibrium? And if we would have the courage to ask those questions and to express our desire, to express our boundaries, to express our fears even, and that, I feel like that's a new container. Like that is the container for the sacred marriage. When we have that possibility, create a safe container where anything can come up. That is the flower of tantra in a way, to allow those themes that have been, where there has been so much repression, and maybe especially for women, like sometimes we don't even know that we can ask. Sometimes, I did a video yesterday, it was like, it's a yes today. Like, we as women, we are almost thinking like, if I give this today, it's going to be expected from me every day. But it's okay to have those boundaries. It feels, this is the desire I have today, it feels right, I want to explore it. It doesn't mean that it's going to feel right tomorrow, because Shakti, the feminine, always changes. So
It's
she's
the
going,
waveform he was talking about, right?
yeah.
And he says what you're saying is you're pointing to wholeheartedness.
Mhm.
So when each being shows up in wholeheartedness in that moment, and there's no shame for being wherever you are in your waveform in that moment in wholeheartedness, that is the way to truly integrate and to move forward from integration, not fragmentation. So
Mhm.
he's saying that, when you show up in that moment, and today is not what yesterday was, and yesterday was super fantastic, and your partner wants some more super fantastic, but you're not in super fantastic place, and you just say, I'm not there today.
Mhm.
And he says that's, and then like you were saying, that's the conversation, um, that's how we integrate the whole experience, as opposed to fragmenting and agreeing to what is not the lived experience, because that agreeing when it's not appropriate for the waveform you're in, that's how all beings fragment.
Yeah.
That's the process of fragmentation.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes so we have something in Tantra that we call RBDSM, but it's made for more when they're relating, that comes from a place where we're not in a relationship. And it's about speaking about the relationship status, about the sexual history, but then it's also the other parts where actually it feels like going back to being babies, but I like it because it sets a frame, and it is to speak about the boundaries, the desires, the fears, and to actually sometimes, when we have forgotten how, when we had a stroke and we forgot how to speak, like to set that container to be okay. Now you prepare the space, it's a sacred space, and then you sit down with that person, and it's like, this is what I'm desiring, this is what I'm longing for right now, and these are my boundaries today, because of whatever it is we have with our embodiment, or whatever, wherever we are right now. And also that is a safe container, that some of our fears, for me, sexuality is a place where you can never hide. There's no way, if you open up completely in sexuality, you are going to go to the deepest of places. So that's why also it's a very scorpionic energy. So to even be able to say down the road, at least, this is what I most fear, that like there's an amazing transformation potential when we go to the core of like being, receiving somebody completely, or being penetrated or penetrating. And that's like the masculine's fear of not being received fully, and the feminine's incapacity of receiving 100%, because 99% is not 100%. Being received 99%, you're not completely received. And being like, it's there, the core wound is of the feminine and the masculine that are almost together. But that 1% is what humanity right now, I feel, is transcending. And it comes from a place that is not sexual, but it's the possibility to go the sexual path there. I would love to hear something about that. What is the power of the sexual way back home?
Well, as you were talking, he was commenting about how in long-term relationships, that presence of the moment is often lost. That over time, there is an erosion of the primacy of the engagement. And that over time, beings in relationship forget that they are a couple and they have waveforms, and they forget to talk about everything. And he says that's what I would always encourage is clear communication. And he says it's one of the hardest things humans have to talk about. And especially, it's so interesting to me that he keeps showing me people who are in long-term relationships, because it's a little bit of like, oh well, if they've been together that long, it would seem like it's easy for them to be honest. But he's showing that there, there's the corruption over time, the not talking over time. And he says, when there's a newness, people step up because but over time there's this erosion of communication, and the expectedness and the patterns pervade. And he says that's one of the big things he's talking about, how careful communication throughout the relationship is key, is essential. But he says if you can communicate about sexuality and relating, it changes your whole relationship. So he's showing how what happens often in long-term relationships is a metaphor or a parallel energy to the not communicating about sexuality, assuming that everything's normal, or and he says that communicating as if it's your first time every time is so important, because every time is your first time. It's the wholeness of the moment. And he says he would encourage us all. He put his hands like this, like it made a little bowl, a cup, a sacred kind of space. And it's as if he's like saying, each engagement you have is as if you are caring for something so delicate. And he put like a little bird, like a little baby bird in it, and just the beginning of life force. Like you're caring for and carrying the essence of creation in the palms of your hands. And if you treat each engagement with the carefulness and the preciseness, the wonder and the awe, the love in each moment, then
and like, how do you show up for yourself and for the other? How much of yourself are you giving and receiving? There's something with that, because sometimes we just see it like a trivial act or something we do for the other, but how much are you able to show up for your own life force? How much are you able to be there with all the planes of what you are made up of?
And he's saying that the act of giving and receiving is often a result, a product of the giving and receiving throughout your day. That it's often not just that moment. You're a waveform within waveforms. Your waveform has traveled through a lot of waveforms. And sometimes you come to the moment of union, of sacred union, of sexuality, and each person is showing up as a waveform that has been through a lot of waveforms in that day. And to acknowledge all the things that have gone into the presence with which you stand and look in each other's eyes. And he says, some of you want to just have an escape of the rest of that, but without acknowledging that it is part of what you're standing in front of the other person with.
Mm-hmm.
There's a fragmentation from the truth of what your come from is. And that wholeheartedness and the unflinchingness of, I come to you today stressed. I want this. And simultaneously, I don't know if I'm completely whole for you. I don't know if
Yeah.
I'm completely present for you. I don't know if I'm completely patient for you. I'm ready to give you what I have today, right now, in this moment, which I acknowledge is impacted by X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, and I mean, we have been on for 40 minutes now, but like what's coming to me too is how sex and money and power are the same energy. So we also use sex a lot to like either, to not to like we punish with sex, and we, how do you say that? Like we give sex or we withhold sex a lot because it's a kind of power. And it's sad when long-term relationship goes into that, often unconsciously, because we don't feel met, and then we can't meet the other, and the other person maybe has a waveform that we don't really have asked about, so we don't understand that waveform, and then we're like, no, I don't want to be that waveform. But if we just spoke about the waveform, then we could actually feel ways of finding a flow that will work. But we don't go there because there's almost this pretense that I already know what's going to be like. I already know what he wants or she wants. I already know like how this is going to end. Like we have this, and that's sad because we are closing the door for a possibility of living in a way that's much more alive and much more aligned.
Right. And he's also saying that in the way that you just described it, it's also as an exchange, um, in the way that you described it, that is also often found in fresh new relationships. If I do this, then this, that energy of exchange.
And
So he's
unconsciously, that's the thing. Like what I see in the geometry is that in new relationships, it's kind of on the table, and in longer relationships, it's unconscious. Like I can see in myself, like I'm doing something. I'm like, okay, there's a motive there, and I'm finding that because I just want to clean everything that's there. Like I'm happy when I see something I do, and it's much more hidden because like there's like it's kind of horses that kind of run in the same rhythm all the time. After a while, you forget like how you kind of run, and it kind of just goes in that. And when there are kids, when they're like all these things, it's like it's this thing right in the beginning about awareness,
right.
and that being the difference between the gift frequency and the city. Like that's what comes in here. Are you living your life on a rhythm on a daily basis where there isn't a lot of awareness? Well, then it's going to be kind of a flat pathway. But with that awareness and with that honesty with yourself of what you're giving and withholding, I feel that the whole frequency of whatever you engage in, whatever you're eating, whatever you're digesting, whatever you're sharing, it's actually that's the complete shift.
Indeed, he says. And that if every time you step into relationship with that level of awareness and with the wholeheartedness and the transparency, the more you move in from hunger into boundlessness.
Yeah, well, I feel there's something about the temple that wants to come in, and I feel like that's going to be another conversation. But for me today, this was a portal, and we had a lot of comments. I wasn't able to share because I'm in Facebook jail, so I can't share anywhere. But we had some really beautiful comments. I would say, Simone, go in also and look at the comments. And I'm so happy that we were able to go here and open this portal back to our aliveness, back to being the heroines in our lives. And I feel like when we women become the heroine in our lives, that's going to create so much value for everybody that wants to become whole in this world. It doesn't depend on gender or color or anything. So for me, this is a portal that is actually very actual right now with everything that's going on in the world.
He said heroines and heroes. It's both. So yes, true, indeed. Mhm.
Mhm.
So I think then we can. He says you can always come back and talk to me. We are just beginning a conversation. There's, it's almost like light years of information that can come through. And he says to come back anytime. And I'm just saying thank you so much for being with us today. And I'm so grateful. I know you are too, Bella. We're both so grateful for all the people who were with us live and all their comments. And thank you, thank you, thank you so much for being a part of this transmission of the 35. We so appreciate you. Until next time, take care.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye bye.